As many of you know, I've been working with thousands of students. We have 11,000 students in my academy, all about racing technique, and I have over 3,000 coaching sessions one-to-one. More and more, I've been noticing this pandemic of a very specific issue that I have to talk about over and over with my students. That is obviously not that easy, or it's not going to fix all your issues right away just by watching this video, but it's gonna sparkle something. It's gonna start something that might, over the next few weeks, help you find a lot of time on your driving. You guys are afraid of steering, and it's not that easy to say. If you've been driving on racing games, for example, on a controller, you tend to always drive the car through understeer, and then whenever you move to a wheel and you start getting more and more competitive, then you kind of don't have to deal too much with this issue. But what I notice, a lot of people that have been starting in sim racing right now without that experience from the controller tend to steer too little. And there's a whole process around this problem, and I want to talk about this in this video. You should not be afraid of steering, because the steer itself is not gonna be the cause of you spinning or not spinning, or going off or not going off. Don't forget this. The steering itself is not gonna be the reason you crash. Why is that? Because you will always have an extra control over the steering with your pedals. So let's create a step-by-step system so you can really fix this if that is your case, or even if you suspect that this is your case, because it's very easy to think that you don't actually have this problem. I mean, if you knew you had this problem, you would immediately fix it. So you guys are unaware that you are under the limit on the steering, and there's a huge problem with that, because if you're under the limit on the steering, then your pedals, they lose precision, they lose feel. You basically can't really notice the difference when you're trail braking if you're not on the limit of the steering. You can't really notice the limit of mid-corner no grip if you're not on the limit of the steering. And when this happens, you can't identify where to push the car. Where are you gonna push the car? On the extremes of the corners. You're gonna brake later, or you're gonna get back on power earlier, and you're gonna try to carry more speed on the extremes. And that is when, because you've been now used to not being on the limit, you find the limit without expecting it, and you don't know what to do with it. You see the problem, right? You're afraid of really pushing the car with the steering, specifically with the steering. Stay with me. And then, because of that, you never really have to deal with the pedals to manage the weight of the car and consequently the balance of the car. And because of that, when the limit happens, you don't know exactly what to do with it, because you have not spent enough time dealing with that. So the step one for you, if you have this problem, or if you didn't realize that you have this problem, is steer a lot, steer more, really abuse the steering. That is the first thing. You're in a simulator, it's fine, go make mistakes, steer more, especially on mid-corner. Find some kind of understeer on mid-corner. This is always the first step. I've been talking about this for years, but it's spread across a bunch of videos, and now I want to make this video specifically about that, because I know it's gonna have a lot of people. So you steer a lot. Most likely you're going to find a lot of understeer. If you trail brake too much, you're gonna find oversteer and spin. But that's already useful, because you will realize that if you just trail brake less and you maintain the steering, you isolate that and you keep the steering as the main objective, you immediately feel the difference between steering a lot with a little bit of brakes and steering a lot with no brakes at all, or steering a lot with too much brakes and, you know, locking the front or locking the rear and spinning and everything. Now you see, you shift your attention to the pedals when you try to, you know, solidify that habit of steering a lot. There's a term for that we call overdriving the front, and it's extremely useful because it, again, forces you to shift your focus off the balance of the car to the pedals. If you've been watching my coaching sessions here on my YouTube channel, you noticed that probably the last 3 coaching sessions had a similar approach. Even though their problems were not necessarily the same, the solution was always steer more first, so that we can find one type of limit, and then we can play with that limit with other things. And the problems are essentially different, but that allows you to feel the problem more clearly. So that is pretty much the first step, steer more. But let's add some more detail to it. I told you, more specifically mid-corner. Why? Why should you steer more the car mid-corner? Because you will have less influence of the pedals, and the car will be more and more sensitive to smaller inputs. So on entry, you're braking a lot, and then if you turn a lot while braking, obviously you're gonna be way over the limit, and then it's not gonna be easy to learn anything by steering too much. But mid-corner, when you turn a lot, 10% brakes are going to make a difference. 10% throttle is going to make a difference. And you're going to learn that finesse of tiny pedal inputs mid-corner to fix and adjust your line. After you get back on power, you can still turn a little bit more and start feeling that the car is now starting to bend and maybe even kind of starting to lose the rear. Then you get back to relaxing your hands more and letting the car flow wide. If you are afraid of turning the steering mid-corner, you always transfer the problem to a second in the future. If you're afraid of steering now where you're supposed to turn, where you're supposed to get the car to point, by the time you get back on power and you start gaining speed out of the corner, if you miss that 5 degrees of rotation, you're gonna need to compensate those 5 degrees again. But maybe by then the car might be too fast. That is why it's so important to maximize the rotation at the lower speed, and the first step is steering. Now, the second step, after you manage to really force the car mid-corner and feel that you're really scrubbing the fronts, even if it feels bad, it's fine, that is part of the process. Get understeer, overdrive the car mid-corner, feel that it's limited, feel that there's nothing else you can do to make the car turn with the steering. The next step is to start adjusting the effectiveness of the steering with your pedals. Only after you start properly using your steering, you will feel the difference with the pedals, especially mid-corner. On entry, on early entry, on the initial turn in, that's already easier to get the car to bend and turn when you start trail braking, because with the weight all the way on the front, you don't have to turn that much to already get the car to really want to oversteer. So that's why on entry, you have to really be careful with that initial turn in as you transition from the brakes before you get into the more steering approach that I'm telling you right now. And on exit, when you get back on power, obviously the car is going to be gaining more speed, and you are going to have to steer less anyways. But on that mid part where you're still, between 25% and 75% of the corner, the first 25% being turned in, and the last 25% being the final phase of the exit where you're just about to be, thrown all the way to the exit curb, that middle 50% is going to be all about you adjusting your pedals to fix the balance of the car. The car is going to oversteer or understeer depending mostly on your pedals. The car is going to oversteer or understeer on exit depending mostly on your throttle, and on entry it's going to depend on your trail braking. And this pandemic that I mentioned is related to people trying advanced techniques like trail braking without having maximized the steering. The brakes will always amplify the steering. Without the steering, you can trail brake as much as you want. You can have the most beautiful decreasing line on telemetry. Nothing's gonna happen because you're not steering. If you're under the limit of the steering, the trail braking is not gonna be effective. Don't forget this. If you're under the limit on the steering, there's no point in trail braking. The trail braking will only help if you reach the limit of the front tires, so that weight of the trail braking actually amplifies the steering. Again, the brake will amplify the effectiveness of the steering. You steer more, and then the brakes support that angle to make the car turn more. And on exit, it's pretty much the same thing, except that the throttle, if you accelerate a lot, for example, then the throttle will decrease the lateral grip. It will get like a little bit of wheel spin, and then the car will not be able to resist to that rotation, and it will want to slide outwards on the rear before the front. So you have to correct the front so that you can go wide like that. But again, on that middle 50%, it's not about accelerating a lot and getting wheel spin to oversteer or braking a lot to get the car to stop on entry. It's really about that 10% brakes to really adjust the balance of the car right on that middle between oversteer and understeer. And if it's even too much oversteer, even with 0% brakes, you can always touch the throttle with 10% and adjust it. Remember step one, we want to stay pretty much on the limit of the steering, even maybe understeering a little bit to get the feel. And then by adjusting that balance between 10% brakes and 10% throttle, you can keep the car on a nice middle point between oversteer and understeer so that you can get the car to rotate as much as possible. The objective of the steering is to give the instruction to the car to rotate as much as possible, and your pedals will adjust the effectiveness of the rear tires on how they react to the front tires asking that much rotation. So if you ask too much rotation with the steering and you're ignoring the oversteer and you stay on the brakes, obviously you're going to spin because you're not giving enough grip to the rear tires. And all that happens obviously again on that 50%, on that 1.5 seconds that you are on the middle of the corner. The responsibility of the balance of the car should, as much as possible, be from the pedals, not from the steering. And this is why people that tend to overdrive the car, especially with the steering, tend to learn more quickly and to become better drivers more quickly. If you tend to overdrive the car by just braking later, but you don't really know what to do mid-corner, then you're gonna struggle because sometimes you're gonna brake too early, you're gonna feel like you're under the limit, and sometimes you're gonna brake too late and you never make the corner because you have not really isolated that steering approach mid-corner before you adjusted the pedals. So if you want to overdrive the car, what I'm trying to say here is overdrive with the steering first. Before anything, don't overdrive the brakes, don't overdrive the throttle, overdrive the steering. And then start adding that extra spice with the pedals on top of it. If you're oversteering on entry, it's fine to touch the throttle. It's fine to accelerate a tiny bit so that you can at least keep the confidence to steer. Because sometimes, especially if you're driving a very oversteery car like the Formula 4, for example, and you try to turn more, but the car just oversteers even if you're not trail braking, you lose a lot of confidence, obviously, which makes you steer less. And I didn't tell you this, but like, obviously the main reason people don't steer a lot or don't go through this overdriving phase is because they have spun while trying to steer more, or they have understeered a lot and it didn't feel good, because understeer obviously necessarily doesn't feel that great. So try that. If you're oversteering on entry or even mid-corner with an oversteer car, even if you're 0% brakes and you're still oversteering, try the same thing. Steer a lot, stay on the steering, keep the fronts busy throughout the whole corner, and then adjust your balance by touching 10% throttle. There's a coaching session that I did with Kyle. It was live on YouTube. It's probably there. You can find it. And we found a lot of time and a lot of confidence by telling him, man, don't correct with the steering if you can correct it with the throttle. Correct the balance, ideally with the pedals first, unless it's a really, really bad oversteer because you really overshot the corner and you broke too late and the oversteer is really bad that you actually need to countersteer. Countersteer is always going to be the last measure because it makes you lose so much time. If you can correct a little oversteer with a little bit of throttle, you're actually pretty much on the limit still and you're still doing well. But if you oversteer and then you correct by countersteering, you get yourself out of the line. And then you lose the rest of the corner, you lose half a second, maybe you lose the next corner preparation line as well. And lastly, I wanted to not forget that the line of the car will always be a closing spiral. As your speed is going down, you're going to rotate more and more and more and more. So you can add more and more steering. And as soon as you get back on power, you go from that limit steering to less and less and less, always letting the car go wide if it starts to complain. A lot of people spin on late exit. Why is that? Because they're afraid of steering mid-corner. They get back on power. They're not on the limit. The car could have been rotating a little bit more, but they're not. And then they go wider than they think. And what happens? Now you try to rotate a little bit more, but the car is way faster now because you have been on throttle for 2 seconds. Turn a lot more at the minimum speed, get back on power, still stay on it. And when you feel that the car is starting to go, you unwind and you allow inertia to take your car all the way to the exit. This is also related to the track usage video that I talked about a few videos ago. I'm gonna put the link here. It all connects. And again, I really like working with you guys. And if you do have this same issue on a coaching session, I'm not gonna lose my patience or anything. I'm gonna tell you exactly what I need to work on, as always, and I love my job. But the reason I'm making this video is because I see that a lot of people have been having exactly the same issue. And again, I understand why it's so common, because it comes from a place of confidence and you don't know exactly where to push the car to build yourself that confidence. So that's why I'm telling you right now, a lot of steering mid-corner towards the lower speeds of the corner will give you that environment so that you can work on that 10% brakes and 10% throttle to adjust the balance from there. And that will give you a lot more consistency and honestly better lap times, less crashes, less spins, because you will know exactly where to push the car at each stage of the corners. If you like this kind of talking format, let me know. If you have any questions as well, talk to me in the comments. and they can also be ideas for new videos on this channel. I'm Sal Almeida, professional racing driver at IMSA and racing coach, and I'm the creator of the Motor Racing Checklist, pretty much the best sim racing online course out there. There's a 28-day refund if you don't improve. We have 7.5 thousand students registered, and I hope to see you there. But if you're a race car driver, you already know doing blind laps without thinking about technique creates bad habits that are actually harder to break. The Motor Racing Checklist is an online course made to fix that. You will learn what actually makes you fast with a method that helped thousands of drivers reach a professional driving technique. It's simple, effective, and built on years of coaching experience with thousands of students. And if you don't improve in 28 days, you get your money back. You can join now, access our Discord, and start getting better today. We have thousands of student reviews there. See ya.